everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, November 20th, 2023, and I'm the host of the show, Dr. Cara Santa Maria. And for those living in the United States and my American friends abroad, I just want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving this week, and I hope that you are spending it surrounded by people that you love, or alone, if that's your thing. If that's your choice, that's an empowered choice, and I'm with you on it. I also want to thank those who make Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download. And that's because we rely on the support of listeners just like you. Obviously, those of you who can support the show offset the cost so that those who cannot afford to support the show can still listen for free. This week's top patrons include Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo, Joe Wilkinson, Pasquale Gelati, and Ulrika Hagman. And if you are interested in supporting the show, all you've got to do is visit Patreon. That's patreon.com/talknerdy. All right, let's dive into this week's episode. So I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. C. Renée James to talk about her new book, Things That Go Bump in the Universe: How Astronomers Decode Cosmic Chaos. Renée is actually a professor of physics and astronomy at Sam Houston State University, and she's also written 2 previous books: Science Unshackled, How Obscure, Abstract, Seemingly Useless Scientific Research Turned Out to Be the Basis for Modern Life, and also 7 Wonders of the Universe That You Probably Took for Granted. So without any further ado, here she is, Dr. C. Renée James. Well, Renée, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Of course. I'm excited to talk about your new book, Things That Go Bump in the Universe: How Astronomers Decode Cosmic Chaos. And there is absolutely a lot of cosmic chaos out there. But before we get deep into that, and by the way, your book just dropped as of this recording just days ago. So this is a very exciting time. I'm curious, first of all, how were you hooked by astronomy? What was your path to get to where you are now?
Oh, so initially, back in my day, back in 1980, there was this TV show that came on. It was called Cosmos.
Oh, yeah.
Carl Sagan, right? And it had 13 episodes, and my parents encouraged me, to come in and sit down and watch this back in the day when you had 3 main TV stations and then PBS, right? And so this was on PBS, and I watched the first episode and I was like, ooh, that's really cool. And by the time we got to the 13th episode and the closing credits for it, I just went, that can't be it. There's got to be more. I want to see more of this, right? And basically I just went, I want to do what that guy does, because it was just such a fantastic, visually amazing series. I got the book pretty much instantly and read it and reread it and reread it. And I still have that one, and it's just threadbare. But it really got me excited about all the stuff that's out there and all the things that we don't know about all the stuff that's out there. And I really loved the way that he was able to make it, personal and relatable. It was not just, hey, here's a bunch of stuff out here, but here's a bunch of stuff that's also you, right? You're part of the universe. You're not just an observer of it.
He did, I feel like Carl Sagan did such a great job of bringing it back, making something that I think sometimes I'm not saying it does, but can feel esoteric, making it very personal.
Right. And so that hooked me pretty much. From then on, that. I just
so from the time you were a kid, you knew.
Yeah, it was 6th grade.
Wow. And so did you ever waver from that path, or did you kind of, look up like how do I become that, and what do I study, and where do I go, and just like really stick to that goal throughout your sort of academic career?
Well, the funny thing was that as I was in high school, one of the things that I also really loved doing was writing. And, so I would write your standard terrible teenager short stories and things like that. And, I entered whatever contests there were for your high school students at the time. And I thought, man, I really enjoy the writing, but I also know that I need to get a physics degree if I'm going to be an astronomer, but I also really like the writing. And then somewhere along the way, my brain said, look, you can write without pursuing that as a degree, but you can't exactly do astronomy without pursuing that as a degree. And so that was kind of but what really sealed it, honestly, was that when my brother, who's 2 years older than I am, went off to the same university that I would go to. And, when I graduated high school, I declared my intentions of being a physics major. And he just laughed, said, I will bet you $10 you can't even survive being a physics major. And so, that was it.
What did he study?
Like, yeah, that's it. I got it my $10, by the way. I did
Good.
get that eventually.
Good.
No, he studied computer science, and he's not dumb. He was just
I'm like, like waving my fist for you.
yeah. He was just like, this stuff's tough, right? Because he knew some of the
Right.
people that had been going through the physics program, and it was rigorous. How about that?
Right. Right. And so, it is rigorous. It is a lot of work. So I'm curious, what your path actually looked like once you started to dive into that work. Like, where did you go to school? What did you study? What was your dissertation topic?
Oh, wow. That one's a fun one. So, okay. So for undergraduate, I went to Rice University in my
Oh, yeah, because
hometown
you're a
of Houston.
Texan.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm from Plano.
Oh, yay or
Bonding over
something.
here.
There we
Yeah, I
go.
mean, I went to UNT. I was born and raised in Texas as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for me, that was like down the road.
Right.
Go home on the weekends and do my laundry and stuff. But, from there, I studied physics, but there was an astronomy sort of concentration that you could have. So I took a couple of astronomy courses along the way, and then did my graduate studies at the University of Texas at Austin, largely because I had gone out to West Texas where the big telescopes are at McDonald Observatory. And I just went, ooh, how cool would it be to drive these? Like half of my life is basically driven by, wow, how cool would it be if I did blank, right? Not a lot of deep thought and consideration. Just, damn, that's neat. I want to do that, right? So I go out to West Texas and I see the big telescopes and I go like, whoa, that's neat. And so I went, who owns these? Oh, that's University of Texas at Austin, which, again, is no slouch when it comes to an astronomy program. They're really seriously world-class researchers there. But that wasn't what was on my mind so much. It was, you got big telescopes and I want to go play with them. And so, yeah, that was where I wound up doing my PhD. And my PhD, the official title of my dissertation was Chemical and Kinematic Correlations in the Galactic Halo.
Okay. What
Which
does that mean?
is it's a big page turner.
Yeah.
So it's, late 90s. And there are things that we have learned about our own galaxy that are, sort of cosmically speaking, pretty recent. And at the time, there was a great push to try to figure out something about the, sort of the genealogy of the stars in the Milky Way galaxy, right? And how it got to be, right? How it got to be the way that it is. And, we didn't, at the beginning of my dissertation, we didn't have the Hubble Space Telescope. That wasn't a thing. And so we hadn't gotten these amazing views deep into time like we do now, and so we couldn't see sort of the way that didn't get that historical time lapse of how galaxies are built up. And so, there were some competing ideas about it. And so what I was trying to do was find evidence that, some of the stars in our galaxy, some of the older stars in our galaxy had particular chemical signatures that told you about their particular lineage that was maybe different from what was going on in some of the other parts of the galaxy. And so we could go like, okay, yeah, these are distinctly different from these. And so maybe they came in from, two merging events, maybe something rolled by our galaxy and we siphoned it off and went, hey, these are my stars now, right? But they're different from some of these other stars. So that was kind of the broad idea of what I did. But the nitty gritty is I looked at like 67 stars. That's it. And got their motions, to see if they had like any kind of wildly weird orbits and figured out what they were made of. And, if they misbehaved in the slightest, I pitched them from my research. I can't have a binary star system. Mine all have to be single stars. I can't have a star that's a variable star doing anything weird. It has to be really super stable and boring. Meanwhile, people down the hall were like, woohoo, doing supernova theory over here. And I'm going, my stars behave.
I love that.
Yours just blow up.
And so what did you discover from studying all of these behaving stars?
I discovered, largely, that wasn't what I wanted to do.
I love it. This is so the academic way, isn't it? I spent a lot of time figuring out that that's not where I want to spend all of my time.
Exactly. Right. It was interesting, but there's one of these things that's like sealed in my memory and or seared into my brain. It's not sealed. And there was a meteor shower happening when I was working on my dissertation, and I was too busy, right? And so I went out and I was watching for a little bit, and I was like, I got to get back to work. And the people I was watching with were like, oh, you had to stop stargazing to go do astronomy. And it was like, wow, that was harsh, guys.
Rude. Yeah.
Right. And then there was another one where somebody, I was all excited about something that somebody had come to give a colloquium. And I was like, oh my God, this is really cool stuff they're talking about, had to do with these subatomic particles called neutrinos. And I thought, dang, that's neat, And so I'm, very excitedly talking about this with, again, one of those people that told me that I had to stop stargazing. And they just looked at me and went, that and $1.50 will get you a cup of coffee. And I went, okay, so clearly not everybody shares my passion for the universe and all these cool things. But on the other hand, nobody seems to know what the heck I'm doing. And that was when I kind of, these are sort of the precipitating events that made me think, I feel like I should work harder at communicating the enthusiasm and the cool stuff, and not so much finding it out for my own research, but finding the things that people are doing that are really cool and then telling the rest of the world about it, whether through teaching classes or writing articles or books or whatever. But it felt to me like we had enough people that could determine how the galaxy was put together, but not a lot of people explaining why this was cool and worthy of human endeavor.
I 100% agree. And I think that we often make the assumption, not within the kind of field of SciComm, but outside of SciComm, I think there's often maybe an unspoken major premise that just because somebody is good at doing the research, that they should also be good at communicating it. But that's a different skill set.
Yeah, it's an entirely different skill set. And it was one of those things where, I could definitely have gone either direction. The dissertation that I did was a worthy dissertation. But but I just felt like I felt like to be the Carl Sagan that I always wanted to be, I needed to do that communication part and try my darndest to make it as interesting as he made it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I think that Sagan was really inspirational for a lot of us who kind of went into this field. And it's funny because even though I didn't study astronomy at all, I'm, in the first in neuroscience and then in psychology. I have a Carl Sagan tattoo. Like
Oh
I
heck
have a
yeah!
quote like down my ribs. It says, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself."
Oh hell yeah!
um, yeah, it's just like I think that he spoke to a lot of us who resonate with that idea of our cosmic place and sort of grappling with the confluence of psychology and physics and philosophy and yeah, who we are and why we're here and or, why is a not it's a leading question. But yeah, who we are and how we're related and how we're connected.
Right, right. Yeah, that was definitely sort of the. I'm not sure that I sat around and made a conscious decision one day, but it all just sort of started sweeping in that one direction for me after that.
I love that. So then speaking of sort of that movement into obviously teaching is a beautiful and like measurable and very intensive way to contribute to the public understanding of these things because you're teaching the next generation of scientists. And so obviously moving into spending more time in the classroom, but also writing, like you said, articles and books. Maybe you can walk us through the books that you have written up to this new one and sort of what their topic was and how you chose to write them in that order.
Um, so the first one, which is Seven Wonders of the Universe that you probably took for granted, uh, I had been post PhD for 8 or 9 years at that point, and had had a few years in the classroom, um, mostly teaching the service courses, the science classes for the non-science majors. So they weren't, in fact, going to become the future scientists. They were going to become the future just about everything else, including teachers, right? Future public school teachers and future accountants and future just about everything that you could imagine. But scientist was not so much on that list. And you come to realize very quickly when you come from a really rigorous science background and you're plopped into a classroom with people who aren't from that same background and don't have that same level of enthusiasm, you know, they look at the science class as a thing to endure and get the grade, run the maze and eat the cheese and then go on to what they really want to do. And I was just mortified by that. I was like, do you not just sit in awe 24/7 at the fact that you're living on a freaking planet? you know, this is the question: is there life in space? Yes, you're it. You know,
Yeah.
does it not mystify you that there is a thing holding you to the ground? You know, and so it sort of was one of those things that grew out of, if people just took 5 minutes to look around at the things that they just completely take for granted, like the fact that they're on the ground, on a planet, around a star, and sometimes it's light outside and sometimes it's dark outside. And I mean, when you start following these questions like, why does it get dark? Then you actually wind up deep into cosmology, right? It's not a matter of just, hey, we got a shiny star next to us and we're twirling around, but it goes even farther than that. And it blows me away. And so I just, was like, okay, well, there's a few things that people really need to think about in a deeper way, other than my cat knocked something off and it fell and broke. Thanks, gravity.
Right.
But so it was like night and light and gravity and stuff. Like, why the hell is there stuff?
Right. Yeah. How does it stay together? Why isn't it always like pulling itself apart?
Why does it exist in the first place, right? Like, I got a desk covered with stuff, and every scrap of it has a cosmic history, right? I mean, okay, admittedly, I should clean it up, but I mean, I can look at awe, in awe at this little stuffed bat my daughter gave me, and go like, okay, what's it made of? Okay, where did that come from? I know how many billions of years old are these particular atoms. So it was night and light and gravity and stuff and time, which is freaking mind-boggling. And then home, the things that make our particular planet and time in space and our place in the galaxy special. And then the last one was wonder. So just the fact that you are a living conscious being that has the ability to see things with a sense of wonder. How is that even possible? So it was it's a lighthearted book, and it's really sort of built around like questions that kids will ask you. And it's, got some cute, goofy little illustrations by one of my friends who's an artist. And, I kept having to tell him, no, that's too pretty. That's too formal looking. Make it more cartoony. And then he'd come back with another, and I'm like, try harder. Try harder to bring it down. Make it less artistic. Make it goofy.
Is that really what you feel like your vibe is? Like you connect to that kind of making things a little bit more approachable, a little bit more fun?
That's the thing that seems to work with my students the best. And honestly, that's just kind of the way I go through life. I am definitely the person that like looks out the window and goes like, squirrel,
Yeah.
let's go look at it.
Yeah, this is maybe kind of an aside, but I'm just curious, as somebody who I guess who herself always relates to Texas. I don't know. I mean, my story is long and meandering and not really appropriate to list here, but like I did leave Texas, and Texas is still home. That's where my family is. That's where there are anchors, but I've, struggled with going back and things like that. So I've been away from Texas for quite some time. But that said, there's still a lot of Texas in me. And I'm just really curious as an astronomer, as a woman, as somebody who kind of grew up under that big sky, is there, and maybe it's hard because you're in it, but is there anything particular about Texas astronomy or about Texas teaching or stargazing or any of that that really speaks to you, that feels really, I don't know, personal?
Ooh. Okay, so I'm going to say this, and anybody that is from Texas that has a massive connection to it is going to hate me for it. But
Okay.
where I really feel that is Australia.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. Well, I've always said, isn't this funny, that there are parts of Australia, especially like Perth, that remind me of Texas.
Texas is, I mean, sorry, Australia is just what happens when Texas and England get together and have a kid.
Yeah.
Because you got your tea time and all of these very British things, just sort of blended together with that, very Texas earthy pioneering spirit type thing.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
what is
it's
it about Australia that grabs you?
I I I don't know. It just does. There's something about it that keeps drawing me back. Like I'm literally going back next week
Oh, I love
um,
that.
for 2.5 weeks, and the book that just came out, the things that go bump in the universe, um, was almost completely written while I had a sabbatical in Australia. You get out under those Australian skies, and there are parts of the sky that are familiar because there's some constellations you can see from both sides of the planet. But the ones that are familiar are upside down from our perspective, right? So you see Orion, but Orion's on his head, which is just so freaking weird. Um, but one of the things that I just think is absolutely mind boggling, and I remember the date that I first saw them, are the Magellanic Clouds. You go out where it's super dark, you can see the Milky Way. It's just, oh my gosh, it's just crazy out down there because it gets much higher in the sky than it does here. And you get the Milky Way, this huge band of awesomeness going over, and then you've got these two satellite galaxies that you can just look at. You don't need a telescope or anything. I mean, you need dark skies, but you just go out and there's these galaxies just hanging in your sky. And the sky is it's so rich. I love it. I love it so much. I could just sit outside for hours and hours and gaze at it there.
I love that. So I'm curious about your new book, Things That Go Bump in the Universe. What inspired how did you come to this concept?
Um, Australia.
Yeah, okay. What
but
was it about being outside that made you think, okay, there's a lot of power out there?
yeah, no, actually, what happened was, and here's my life history.
Gimme.
Back when I was a kid, those Qantas commercials, and then Crocodile Dundee. No, but for real, in 2012, well, okay, I guess technically in 2011, my colleague and I decided that we were going to do a study abroad class. We were going to organize a study abroad class because what we wanted to do was take an astronomy class to see the annular eclipse that was happening in May of 2012. And we also wanted that same class to see this thing called the transit of Venus, where Venus passed in front of the sun. And the next time it's going to do that, we're all going to be dead. So this is a very rare event. You don't just see a transit of Venus. Now, a transit of Venus is a lot less epic than a solar eclipse because Venus is a lot farther away. And so it looks like basically a little black dot just trucking across the sun. But we wanted to do that, and we wanted to go somewhere interesting to see these things. And I just went, well, how about we go to Japan or something? Never been there, that would be fun. And then, he starts looking into the how often is it cloudy
Oh, yeah, that's
stuff. And he went,
important.
oh,
Yeah.
that's bad. That, there's like an 80% chance that it's going to be cloudy at that time of year. And I was like, okay, well, I've never been to Australia. We go do that. So we go through and we organize this study abroad class, take these students down to Australia so that we can see the transit of Venus. And as it turns out, from complete shit ass luck, we decided to go to Parkes, this giant 64-meter radio telescope that's about a 5-hour drive from Sydney. We know nothing about any of this stuff, right? We just we're going to take some students over and hope for the best. Maybe we'll get some people to do some guest lectures for us, and maybe we'll see some cool things, and that'll be good, right? So we decided, okay, we're going to go up to this radio telescope because we know it exists, because we just kind of poked around on the internet to find it. So we wind up out there to watch the transit of Venus. Person that sort of, and I don't remember his exact title, but the name is John Sarkissian. He was out there watching the transit of Venus as well, but he's been working at Parkes for eons. And he's like, hey, do you guys want to get a tour? I'm like, oh, yeah, we'd love to get a tour, right? And so he takes us around and shows us all the cool stuff. And so at this point, we've been in Australia for all of 10 days, and it's just been spectacular. We'd been in the Sydney area. We took trains and buses and things that they don't have here in Houston, really. And it was just a really cool experience. And so I had a sabbatical that was due at some point, and I went, I have got to figure out a way to get down to Australia again. What can I do? So basically I got on Facebook and said, anybody know any astronomy education people down in Australia that I could chat with? And one of them said, sure, come on down. We'll find something for you to do. And I went down there in 2016. So it's February of 2016. I happened to be at CSIRO, Astronomy and Space Science. And this is when the announcement of the first gravitational wave detection was made. It was literally the week after I got there for that sabbatical. And so I was there, in the room with all the important people hearing from One of the astronomers that had to do with the observatories that were making that announcement, and it was just, it just took off, and I was just hooked, right? Because, this guy is talking about these two black holes that have 30 times the amount of material that the sun has in it, that came spiraling together and crashed together and released as much power in a tenth of a second, as much energy in a tenth of a second as all of the rest of the stars in the entire universe put together. And I was like, holy shit, that's a lot of energy, right? And the thing is that we had to create these exquisitely sensitive detectors to be able to pick up this signal. Every star in the entire observable universe, that's the amount of power we're talking about for that tenth of a second. And we barely were able to pick up a signal like that. It took so many years of engineering and computing power and just all sorts of stuff to be able to pick up a signal that was the most energetic thing we'd ever picked up. And that just kind of blew me away. I was like, that seems like that's the wrong thing. You feel like if it's that powerful, you should just go out and look up and go like, damn, that's bright.
Yeah, like I can see it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that wasn't the way it worked out, right? There was zero actual light that came off this thing. It was all in gravitational waves, and we're part of a species that's clever enough to figure out that, one, these things called gravitational waves should even exist, and two, we can figure out a way to see them, to detect them. And that was it. That was when I just went, holy cow, what else do you people do? You've got black holes spiraling in on each other, and they're like, oh, that's nothing. We got pulsars too. They're doing weird stuff as well. And oh, don't forget, if neutron stars collide, they do some weird stuff. And I'm just going, oh my god, this is a whole universe is nothing like my quiet little well-behaved stars. They.
Yeah.
I could go take a look at those now, and they would still be doing exactly the same thing that they were doing back in the 90s. But this is the type of stuff that changes, in some cases, in a millisecond.
And there's so much of it too. It's like teeming with it.
Oh, I know.
Like, how do you even narrow down what you want to, obviously, like you're inspired thinking about these gravitational waves, but like, how do you even narrow down how you're going to cover all of the things that go bump in the universe?
Well, see, that's the thing. You don't cover all of them.
Right. Yeah.
You cover the shiny objects that catch your attention. I have to say that the proposal I sent to Johns Hopkins University Press and the final product looked nothing alike, other than the title.
Right. What changed?
I mean, I just kept following that white rabbit wherever it led me. If somebody said, "Hey, have you talked to so and so?" No, I haven't talked to so and so. Honestly, I didn't even know they existed. And they're like, "Oh, we'll put you in touch," right? So then I would go interview somebody else, and they would tell me a story that I thought, "Oh, this is amazing. This is so cool. People need to know this." And it just, what I think is just so incredibly serendipitous, maybe, or something, is that it all tied together ultimately. It wasn't just like 16 different standalone things. They all tied together. And again, it's that whole connectedness of things in the universe. They all do ultimately tie together, but I just didn't expect it to go that way.
What is that? Like, I mean, and I know it's kind of asking a lot, right? But like, what is that thread? How was it that you were able to see those connections and then articulate them so kind of expertly? Because you're right, it could very easily feel like a bunch of disparate experiences isn't the right word, phenomena, but the universe itself is modelable, I guess, and the universe itself is everything is related to each other because it all came from the same, I guess, source.
Well, and it has to do with the fact that, one of the overarching things of the book is that we're talking about some of the most energetic things that can happen in the universe. And it's the, really energetic temporary things that happen in the universe. And the thing about it is that for the most part, it's related to either massive stars or binary systems where you've got two objects. And a lot of times it has to do with something called compact binary system. Well, not compact binary systems, but things where you've got two really compact objects, leftover corpses of stars that happen to be really dense and really massive. And when they play tug of war with each other, they create some really energetic phenomena. And so, a lot of these things are related to those things playing with each other. So I didn't have anything to do with like creatively winding this all into a single path. It was just, that's just the way it is. If you've got a couple of
Right.
neutron stars hanging out, they will do some things. And if you are looking at them in radio waves, you're going to get this type of signal. And if you're looking at them, a gravitational wave signal, it's going to look like this. But what sort of surprised me was how many things that I had always sort of compartmentalized in my mind were connected like that. But also I just happen to be a really fascinatingly good writer, and I can do these sorts of tricks.
So tell me, let's dive into a few more. What are some of these things that go bump in the universe, other than the ones that we've already kind of mentioned?
Well, I mean, the most obvious ones are the things that give off actual light, right?
Right.
And
Things we can see or detect relatively readily.
yeah, so there are a few ways that we can get information from the universe. One is light, and one is actually the easiest one is obviously visible light, because if you can see the sky, you can see if something changes in it. And so that's actually sort of where we start, is how many of these things have we actually seen? If you're living 1,000 years ago, would you see anything interesting happening in the sky? Or does it basically just kind of stay the same? And so, we start our journey actually talking about whether there are records of things like an exploding star, way back when. And then slowly working our way up to, well, what is an exploding? What does it take to make an exploding star? What do they leave behind? How do you disentangle the signals of the things that are left behind? And how have we done this? Because a lot of these things, people basically looked at and went, we're seeing a thing, but we don't know what it is. And my favorite was the story of the quasars, which don't get nearly as much airtime as they should have in the book. But I just thought their sort of discovery story was pretty cool. You've got
Talk to us about that a little. Yeah. Well, first of all, what is a quasar?
Yeah, that's interestingly, back when I was an undergraduate, that was a question that they'd not really settled on very well.
Right.
Because to get a quasar, you need to have a supermassive black hole. And it needs to be a very hungry supermassive black hole with a lot of stuff feeding it. And this material goes swirling around and tries to race into your supermassive black hole that has millions of times the mass of the sun. And as it's doing that, it is essentially giving you a cosmic scream, right? It's racing around, creating this incredible dynamo. Energy is just colossal as stuff is being pulled into a gravitational bottomless pit. And so you'll wind up with these jets of light and particles that come basically off the poles of your black hole. Like a sort of a really serious death rays, right? or kind of like blow torches or something. So, if you're looking at these things and you're looking down the barrel of them, they're quite bright. When I say quite bright, they are pumping out basically the sun's entire lifetime of light, all 10 billion years of sunlight, within about an hour. Yeah. And so you can see them quite a long way away, like all the way back to, the beginning of the universe, essentially. But when they first saw these, they were like, oh, hey, look, there's a bright bluish dot. And okay, fine. It's just a little bright bluish dot. It's a star, right? So it looks like a star. And then we got clever and we start doing things like mapping the universe in radio waves. So we, look at all of these various parts of the universe in radio waves. We're like, oh, look, that's a really bright thing in radio waves. I wonder why that is, right? And so it's a science that only started really fully form in about the 50s. So we'd known, hey, here's this thing that looks like a blue dot. And then we start up this brand new science of radio astronomy, and everything is really out of focus in radio astronomy. And you're like, oh, hey, some of the areas in the sky are really pumping out a lot of radio waves for reasons we don't know, in different patterns. And then they slowly start to piece together, oh, hey, there's one region where we know a star blew up 1,000 years ago, and look how bright it is in radio waves. Dang, we're clever people. And then we find this other thing. We're like, holy cow, this thing is insanely bright in radio waves, and it has no business being bright in radio waves because it's just a dopey little blue star. And so they're like, maybe this is like a radio star, Video killed the radio. No, that's not the way it worked. And, of course, they want to go and get more information. Like, well, maybe the radio source is not the actual dot that we're looking at. Maybe it's something else in the vicinity. And they needed to like really, really zero in on it. And it was really cool because this particular object happens to be something that, if everything lines up just right, the moon passes in front of. And so, the moon slowly worked its way and blocked out the thing that was the, quote, star, and incidentally blocked out the thing that was pumping out all the radio waves. And they're like, oh my God, that's so weird. It's a thing, and it's not a foreground thing. We thought maybe it was a close by star, but no, it seems to be really associated with this really bright radio source. I'm like, okay, next thing we got to do, we got to take a spectrum of it. We got to see what's going on with it. What's it made of? So they take a spectrum of it like they've done with lots of stars, get the rainbow of it, check out the fingerprint, figure out, some of the gory details. And that's actually what I did with all of my stars when I was doing my dissertation. Was I would get their fingerprints and I would find out what their motion was. Were they a little blue shifted, a little red shifted? And in my case, it was always a little bit blue shifted or red shifted.
Yours were the boring old normal stars. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it meant that they were either moving a very slow speed towards us or away from us. Slow being like, 10, 100 kilometers a second. Whatever. But this thing, once they got the spectrum for it, they went, oh, that doesn't look like anything we know. It's not like any star we know. And so then eventually they went, okay, well, let's see if we can figure out what these wavelengths really are telling us. And it took a bit, but they did discover this is a big redshift for a star that looks like it's, cosmically speaking, right next door. And the only things in our universe that have big redshifts are things that are stupendously far away. And they were just like, that makes no sense. Because it can't be that far away and still show up this bright,
Right.
This is something that was 1,000 times farther away than the Andromeda Galaxy, and the Andromeda Galaxy is 2 million light years away.
Wow. Yeah, like we shouldn't be able to see it.
Yeah, whatever the heck it is that is making this much energy, right? there was really no concept. And that's actually one of the things in the book, is that there's like every other chapter is, but nothing that we knew about could cause this much energy that fast. Right. And so then like back to the drawing board. But this was one of those where it's like, we definitely know nothing can make this much energy this fast unless black holes exist and they get super massive. And then they all kind of looked at each other like, it's got to be something else. You know, you guys are crazy. But it was actually the first sort of indirect observational verification that black holes were actually a thing. And this was in 1963. And it took a really long time for that idea to really, really get any traction, because it was just absurd. You can't have a thing that makes that much energy that fast. It just doesn't exist. And the universe is like, well, I mean, clearly I do.
Yeah, exactly. You just got to figure out how to find that out.
Yeah, you just need to expand your mind.
Yeah, like develop some tools. You got this. It's such a fascinating story. Or how do I put this? Sort of, and I know I've mentioned this on the show before, but focusing a little less on content and more on process for a while. The importance in science communication of describing why we know what we know, or how we know what we know, and not just the thing that we know. The storytelling of how this reality came to be measurable truth, as opposed to um, theoretical, or as opposed to hypothetical. I think very often the best courses, when I was going through my education, the ones that captured me the most, the books that spoke to me the most, were the ones that told the stories of how we figured it out, because that's really the core of the scientific method. It's a method. It's a process. And
Exactly.
sometimes we don't spend enough time on that, do we?
We as a species, not so much. I try to do that. I try to keep the everything in my classes. I want my students to have a broader context. You know, I don't care if that means that I only cover 4 things. They're gonna really know what's going on with those 4 things. And one of the things actually that I kind of think is fun, maybe certainly eye-opening, is very first day of class, true false, the sun's a star, and everybody's like, duh, it's true. Of course the sun is a star. And then I say, how do you know that? And they're like, hey, because it
I don't
is.
know. Someone
But
told me when I was a
yeah,
kid. Come on.
exactly. My third grade teacher, you got your sun, you got your stars, you got your planets, and you got your moons, and you got Pluto,
Right. Yeah. We'll deal with him later. Yeah.
But it was, it's one of those things that I'll say, how do you know that? And of course, anybody that's ever been mildly interested in astronomy will start spouting off things to me like, well, it fuses hydrogen and makes energy and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, how do you know that? Like, what could you do observationally to prove to somebody that this blazing ball of death out there is anything like in the same family as those little twinkly things you see at night? And so that's the type of thing that I hope kind of grabs them. And like, I never really thought about that before. I just kind of accepted it. But yeah, usually by about the 8th or 9th week of a university level astronomy class, my students can say with confidence that the sun is a star. And then, they'll get that answer right on the 3rd grade standardized test. But they'll know why. Yeah, so we do go into these are the ways, these are the tools that we developed, and here's the types of things you can tell from these tools. And this book, honestly, is just an extension of that. How did we get from nothing much ever happens in the sky to about 100,000 stars blow up every day? And we're hoping to witness the collisions of multiple black holes, binary systems every day. It's a long trek.
Yeah. Ugh. There's so much richness here. Obviously, like in an hour, we cannot talk about all the things that go bump in the universe. In a lifetime, we cannot talk about all the things that go bump into the universe. But I am curious, as we're starting to sort of wind down our time, if there's anything that, especially like in the new book, or just anything kind of in general that you were hoping to be able to discuss that we didn't get to.
Um, things that we didn't get to.
Yeah, I feel
Well,
like
we
we
didn't.
covered some pretty decent ground.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I found utterly fascinating as I was writing this book was, and I knew these things sort of intellectually, being an astronomy professor, but to sort of hear how the sausage is made, and for some of these projects, um, just the richness of our observing tools and the insane quantity of data that astronomers generate. Like, we have observatories that are like your standard observatories, the type of thing that made me go, ooh, I want to do my work at UT Austin, because big telescope, dome, mountaintop, right? That's what people think of if you say observatory. But in Louisiana and Washington State, and even peppered around the rest of the world, you've got these things that are basically right angles with 4 kilometer long sides. And these are the things we use to detect gravitational waves. At least there's some of the things that we use to detect gravitational waves. But it's an observatory. Observatory is part of LIGO's name. It's Laser Interferometry Gravitational Wave Observatory. Um, and then you've got this thing that is buried 1 kilometer deep in Antarctica called IceCube. It's an observatory. It observes tiny little subatomic particles that come racing through. Pulsars. There are stars. I mean, dead corpses of former massive stars, little spinning things that act like little lighthouse beams, except they whip around a few hundred times a second. City-sized objects whipping around a few hundred times a second. They actually make part of this network of very long LIGO arms to detect gravitational waves at a different frequency. We use the universe to observe the universe. I think that's freaking insane.
Yeah. Well, we have to, right?
Yeah. And then tree rings, I found out, are a type of observatory. Find out whenever our atmosphere got peppered with a bunch of high energy particles. Radio telescopes are a type of observatory. There's this observatory that's out in Western Australia. I swear to God, it just looks like a bunch of mechanical spiders. 4,000 of them, right? We have so many cool ways to listen in on what the universe is doing. I think it's fascinating. And we're so smart to be able to do that, right? As a species, we're just really clever. I think that's so cool.
It really is. I always close out, Renee, my show with the same. I say always, but I forget a lot. But we have time, so I want to make sure I do it. But I usually close out my show with my guests by asking them the same two questions, and they're sort of big picture questions. But obviously, as a cosmologist, as a physicist, you are a big picture thinker. So I'm curious your take on these. Are you ready for them? All right. So, when you think about the future in whatever context feels relevant to you, so this could have to do with your work or it could be much more personal. And as I always say, it could be individual, familial, cultural, or I should say societal, global, even cosmic. Um, First, what is the thing that really is truly keeping you up at night? The thing you're most concerned about? Maybe you're even finding yourself to feel a bit pessimistic or even cynical about. And then on the flip side of that, so we end on a more positive note, where are you finding your hope and your optimism? What are you genuinely looking forward to?
Ah, wow. Those are some good questions. I am greatly concerned about the state of the planet that is being left for my kids. So I've got two high schoolers and one in his mid-20s. And, back in my day, I mean, I live in Houston now, and I was born in Houston, and I've had, adventures in other cities for a few years, but for the most part, I've always been here. And, you hear, well, back in my day, it wasn't like this. We didn't have winters like this or summers like this. And, and that's real. Like, I can very distinctly remember never, ever, 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 ever being able to do a swimming party for my birthday because it had always gotten cold by October 1st. This year, I could absolutely have done that. So yeah, I mean, I have grave concerns about the things that are happening on a global scale and how quickly they're happening on a global scale, and how helpless I am as an individual, right? To really do much other than, my level best to educate my students about how science is done and why, these are the conclusions people reach when they look at data. So that is definitely a thing that keeps me up at night. But the other thing that gives me hope is, I look at my students, I look at my kids, and I think, some of you guys are pretty damn smart. You're incredible problem solvers. And if we're part of a species that can figure out how to use tree rings to tell us about energetic activities that happened 1,500 years ago, we're a clever enough species to fix it, right? We can fix the problems. And, so I kind of oscillate quite a bit on that one. It's like, oh, we're so fucked. Wait, we're okay because we got smart people. Wait, but nobody listens to them, right?
Right. Hopelessness to the hopefulness, because sometimes the problem doesn't feel like it's unsolvable. It feels like there's not enough will to solve it.
Exactly. But I mean, I'm a hopeless optimist, I think, if that makes any sense. I still find just great pleasure in the simple act of being alive. I just think it's just amazing if you think about it. Because there's all these other things in the universe that are really cool, and, black holes and neutron stars and exploding stuff. Not a single one of them is alive. Like, they can't perceive us, but we can perceive them. And I just think that's like magic.
Oh, I love that. What an incredible note to kind of end this lovely, lovely chat on. Well, everyone, let me just pull it up one more time. Because I want to make sure I always have to get the subtitle just right. Everyone, the book is Things That Go Bump in the Universe: How Astronomers Decode Cosmic Chaos by Dr. C. Renée James. Renée, thank you so much for being here with us and teaching us all of these fascinating things.
Thanks again so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And everyone listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.